Hey, Steve.
Hey, Jim.
You want to hear some bad news?
Well, all right.
You know the 80s?
Yes.
That was 40 years ago.
Well, that does suck. Wow.
And welcome once again to Two Guys Talking About Records, a vinyl community podcast. My name is Jim, and I'm a record store owner.
And I'm a very depressed Steve, a record collector that, wow, 40 years ago.
You know, and it's kind of hitting me too, because this year, 2023, I'm getting the notices via Facebook that it's our high school's 40th anniversary, 40 graduation reunion. So it's sinking in that 1983 was 40 years ago, and holy cow, looking at the calendar, it was.
Has AARP started sending you material in the mail?
It's been a couple of years, yes.
Okay, fantastic. It's when the funeral homes start to really come at you with their letters. Hey, now's the time to plan.
There we go. So the 1980s is going to be the subject of today's episode. But first, as always, because this is a vinyl community podcast, Steve, what kind of goodies did you bring in this week?
I had a lighter week, which is always kind of strange for me, but I had two albums, and it's from a French group called, I will say this wrong, but and so for all the French viewers out there, sorry. In Attendant Anna is the name of the group, and I had their second album, Juliet, and their third album, Principalia. It is... Oh, there's some jangle. It's kind of a little bit like Cake. They have the guitars in there, but then they pop in some horns, a little trumpet, a little saxophone. But the vocalist sounds like Stereolab. So you have a Stereolab type vibe happening, but yet it's more of a pop type music. It was very cool. Very, very interesting albums. I really enjoyed both of them, something kind of totally different. One of them, Principalia, just came out this year, so it's a brand new album for the year. The other one was from Junior Kimball. He's from the Hill Countries in Alabama. I guess it's called Hill Country Blues. And he plays, his blues is more of a droning style. And this was his last album that, for the life of me, I can't remember the name of it right off the top of my brain. But it came out in 1997. And you know, he was obscure for years. In fact, he just gave up on music and just had his own little juke joint. And then someone came in and found him. And so his last years of his life, he did 4 albums. And between him and R.L. Burnside, they really made some cool blues that came out of that area, but it has a drone to it. And so it's totally different type of blues. It sounds more contemporary, but yet old, which makes no sense at all, but it's because of this drone that they put in, because they're always hitting the bass, the bass string constantly, and it gives this drone sound. It's very interesting music. What about you?
Well, it was a lighter week for me, believe it or not. Still kind of catching up from RSD, but some very interesting stuff that I wouldn't normally have thought of or known about. First up was this group called Envy of None, which I had heard about before but never really dove into. A friend of mine had mentioned it. He's a big Rush fan. This is Alex Lifeson's group, his new group, Alex the guitarist from Rush. Mm-hmm. And it is very interesting in the fact that it's more modern, but it has this very 80s synth pop feel to it. Hard to explain, kind of like the droning blues, but I'm still kind of easing into it. But so far I'm liking what I'm hearing. But it's a new album as of last year, just came out, and it was a Canadian RSD picture disc. So, I looked into the regular vinyl version of it, and it's actually pretty darn good, but it's different. It's not Rush by any means, and it's a very understated Alex Lifeson guitar, which is odd to hear because he's going to be such a big force in a group. Mm-hmm. Now, the other 2 albums that came in were unexpected. They came into the store, and yes, folks, confirming this, that sometimes record store owners keep some stuff for themselves.
I've seen that. I've tried. Hey, can I buy? No, I'm keeping it. Really? Damn it.
Yep, sorry.
Not here. No, it's another store.
No, never. But a pair from Neutral Milk Hotel. Now, I've heard of this group.
Yeah.
They are, I think, from the 90s to 2000s, in that era. Mm-hmm. I have to go back and do some more research on them. And I've ordered these before for people in the store, but never really delved into them. Well, a couple of different open copies came in some smaller collections this past week. And I thought, well, this looks kind of cool. I threw it on there. And the first spin through, I don't think I was paying that much attention. I was just like, yeah, that's kind of cool. The second one, a little bit deeper, I said, man, this is actually pretty good. It's got this more alternative sound, indie rock alternative sound, but it's a mixture into the droning, which you're kind of getting me into with the older Velvet Underground, like a guitar drone that goes underneath with a lot of it. So that was instantly attractive to me. And I thought, this is pretty cool. So I gave them a couple of deeper listens, and they're going into the personal collection. But one of them was the first one, a reissue, not the originals. The originals go for a little bit, but Neutral Milk Hotel on Avery Island. And then their only other album was the Airplane Over the Sea.
Yeah.
So very cool album covers, great music. I'm going to see if we can get you to check them out too and find some of this stuff. But it's really neat.
Well, I've seen them out there. It's one of those groups I never thought, maybe just because I thought, what a stupid name for a group, so why bother? I mean, Neutral Milk or whatever. But
well, we can talk about that with the Dead Milk Pit as well.
That's true.
It's in a name.
Yeah.
But very cool stuff. But I'm happy to have those in, and I'm going to get some enjoyment out of them and do a little bit deeper dig into the Alex Lifeson project and see Envy of None, see where that takes me.
Okay. Wonderful.
So on to the 80s, or back to the 80s, if you will. It is. I can't believe it's been 40 years. A couple of episodes ago, you and I went through the albums that helped shape us, that were impactful in our lives. And we talked about doing kind of an 80s retrospective, which is mirroring a little bit what your midweeks are in your YouTube channel. You're going through the 80s year by year. Yep. I got thinking there are so many of the songs from the 80s that were impactful to me, but also I enjoyed a heck of a lot. So this really kind of threw me into an interesting loop where I created a Spotify playlist to help me remember what we were going to talk about. And then this took me to the next step of saying, well, we're going to share these playlists. In a half hour or so, we're going to try to get through this. But in the same token, I think we're going to share the larger playlist from each of us for these songs. What do you think?
No, it's a kind of exciting. It was to do this and put these playlists together because they're very eclectic. Because the 80s, you hear a lot of people, will say, oh, the 80s were terrible. There wasn't any good music. And I hear that a lot. And to some extent, some of the pop charts I really didn't like, but I was getting older. So new kids come on the block, new kids on the block go, oh, for God's sakes, Bar-Kays, oh, really? But I was getting past that age for those groups. Now, for other people, they're the greatest groups in the world. But for me, it was digging deeper into this music and all this alternative that was coming out of the 80s. This is just mind-blowing.
And that's where I really went to as well. You think back on this, and you're right. There was a lot of music that was just like, are you kidding me? It's tough to think of that as a decade. The 80s not only gave us REM, It's the End of the World as We Know It, but it also did Starship. Yeah. We Built This City. Oh. So where do you stand on a decade that can give us such a wide range of this is so great and oh man, not this again?
We Built the City is the worst song ever made. It was Satan made it in hell and he sent it up here to give us, and it brainwashes you. Oh,
I will agree to that, but there are some folks that do like it.
Yes, there are. Yes, I apologize, but I'm just telling you, Satan made it.
So if we go through our playlist, I looked at mine and was originally saying, well, let's take this sequentially, like you're doing on your channel where you're going to go through 80 through 81 and onward. So in January, I had to stop and think because the brain's getting older. In January of 1980, I was in the middle of my freshman year in high school. And coming off of the farm, as we talked about before, it was country music, but I had just recently discovered the joys of, then it was called heavy metal, but now it's just basically hard rock or even oldies in some cases. So you get things like the AC/DC, and from my little list here, AC/DC, Shoot to Thrill is on there for me. Ozzy Osbourne's Crazy Train. The mellower stuff, hate to say this, but like a Bring It On the Heartbreak by Def Leppard, or even REO Speedwagon's Keep On Lovin' You, were all early factors in my foray into rock and roll in the first couple of years of that decade. And then, of course, as we talked about before, the impact that Rush has had on me. And the one song that's going to stand out above all else is The Spirit of Radio as the most impactful song and favorite song of that decade, especially the early parts of the decade. Rush, Spirit of Radio from Permanent Waves.
Yeah, for me, I did not get into the hard rock of the 80s. I was in 1980, I guess I was a junior in college. It was still, I was listening to FM radio now because I didn't have it growing up. So I was hearing the classic rock. But what was catching me more was kind of the start of MTV and seeing all this stuff. And so I think of, the early part of the 80s, there's Men Without Hats, the Safety Dance. Joe Jackson is out there with a Night and Day. The Human League. These were kind of the groups that was what I was listening to at the start. But as I got out of college and began talking to other people and listening, suddenly this changed. And at the very beginning of the 80s, you had the very first Dead Kennedys album that comes out. And so, we have, Holidays in Cambodia was the name, which blew me away. It was such a good song. The Cramps came out, with songs the Lord taught us. And I already talked about that one, so as being one of the most influential albums within me. There was another. Thomas Dolby came out too, but that was more the other ones. I'm trying to think. This was a weird one that came out though in the '82, Nebraska for Bruce Springsteen.
Really?
And that was in '82. And really, I hated that album for years because it was so quiet and so boring. But as I've gotten older, I've gotten to enjoy the sparseness of this album. And when I think of the song, my song from that album, just Highway Patrolman, it is such a good story of two brothers, one's that state trooper and one is basically kind of a criminal. And how that state trooper has to decide, do I go and try to arrest my brother or not because of what he's done? And there's just so much beauty, so much loneliness to this. When you just listen to that, it's just a wonderful story being told and blows me away.
Well, it doesn't hurt that Nebraska being the home state as well, it helps drive that home for you.
It does. Actually, the album, he made it because there was a killing spree in Nebraska in the late 50s, and he had read about this, and he called the reporter that followed it, and they talked on the phone for an hour or so, and he began writing down all these ideas that became Nebraska.
Interesting.
Yeah.
So as we move forward on this, I really began to drift away from the whole idea of let's list these out sequentially, because all of a sudden, as we get into the mid-'80s, I started college, by the way, in '85, waited a year or two after high school. But in that interim, I still had that kind of hard rock feel, getting into songs like The Kinks, Do It Again off of Word of Mouth, just one of my favorite all-time albums, but a great song on there. Of course, Jump from Van Halen, 1984, has got to be big. Side note on this, I had friends when that song came out. This was, I mentioned that interim after high school in '83 and before I went to college in '85. We get 1984 sandwiched in there. Mm-hmm. And I had friends that were such diehard Van Halen fans, and I remember them being visibly upset at the fact that Eddie Van Halen had introduced keyboards into a Van Halen album. And as it turns out, that's one of their biggest sellers ever in 1984.
The band didn't want the keys. Only Eddie wanted the keys. All the band members were totally against putting keys on here. And so there we go. And all Eddie could do was, told ya.
We get this real synthesizer sound. And a lot of people don't realize, too, that if you haven't listened to the entire album, there's a song called 1984, which is nothing but sweeping synthesizers as a lead-in to the synthesizer notes that kick off the song Jump.
Yeah.
It's a very short little synthesizer interlude, and that just rubbed a lot of people the wrong way.
It did, yes. This is not Van Halen. This is not. It's now one of those British synth groups.
But there is some value to those British synth groups because a lot of those ended up making my list as we get through. But you mentioned the Cramps also, and I think we talked on Impactful Albums, and the Cramps were in there as kind of opening that door to me to this fun punk side of things. And from the Cramps, Bad Music for Bad People, one of the cool ones on there was, for me at least, She Said. I know Goo Goo Muck was a big one on there, but She Said was a fun one for some reason for me.
For me, turned out to be, well, that was Songs of Lord Toss, but it was on That Bad Music for Bad People TV set. I just, oh my God, that's the most irreverent song in the whole wide world. It's like some kind of mass murderer out there, but fun stuff.
So 85 hits. We're halfway through the decade, for me at least, on this. And I begin this shift. We talked before about me ending up at the college radio station at Northern Michigan University in late 85. And all of a sudden, it's like, well, I can play Rush on here, but all these other people are playing stuff like REM and The Cure and the Talking Heads.
Yeah.
So this opened it up to me. And I got a few favorites from that. REM, it's so tough to narrow down to one song, at least for me. But if I had to, and we're going to for this list, I'm going to say Can't Get There From Here is probably one of my top ones from REM from that era.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree on REM. Man, they put out so much good stuff. And the 80s REM is by far my favorite.
Yes.
Because it was so, no one had ever done it. I mean, it was like a new genre that they started up. It's like, well, what is this? It doesn't fit in any category necessarily.
Lots of other bands followed. You call it jangle pop. I like to still refer to it as college radio music. Yeah. And to me, that was just, while other people are listening to some of the more top 40 hits, I talked to my wife earlier. She said, wow, there's no Prince on your list, something from Purple Rain. I acknowledge the importance of that, and I enjoy listening to that. It's just not one of my favorites. I tend to fall more on the semi-obscure college radio side of the 80s. Again, we'll talk about the Cure, In Between Days, favorite song of mine from them. Promise, the Violent Femmes, another great album. The Violent Femmes for self-first titled. Promise on there is one of my top ones off of that.
Okay. Yeah, mid-'80s, I also was switching. I mean, there was some popular stuff. The Eurythmics, they put out Would I Lie to You in 1985. And that it was such a, in fact, the album itself, Be Yourself Tonight, was such a hard rocking album. But Would I Lie to You brought in these massive horns and just incredible. Love that. But where I was changing is Jesus and Mary Chain came out, Just Like Honey. Opens up that album, one of the greatest opening tracks. And so it's now the beginning of shoegaze is happening. A little earlier, a couple years earlier, you had the Dream Syndicate, and they put out, Tell Me When It's Over from Days of Wine and Honey. I don't know what the other part of it was. But again, it was a whole new, different type of music that was coming out. It had some of that jangle, but yet there's the Velvet Underground, this feedback and drone kind of happening. But one of my favorite from the mid 80s was The Chills. And The Chills was a New Zealand band. And they did a song called Pink Frost. And it's about a serial killer. Now, everything I've talked about so far has dealt with serial killers or death. I consider myself a happy person, but I'm looking, I go, oh my God, here's another serial killer song. But it's just this wonderful, it starts almost like a happy song. And, for the first 30 seconds, and then it turns into this dark song, this wonderful stuff. The group is The Chills, and you just pull it up, and I put it on the playlist. Pink Frost blows me away.
Let me go on the record here by saying that, I know Steve. He was a quiet guy, enjoyed his music.
That's right. He always seemed okay to me.
He did. Lots of weird music, though. That whole droney sound that began to permeate into the alternative music, the college radio music. Other ones from that era, the mid, that call to mind on my list include things like Don't Change by NXS. The Hoodoo Gurus, Bittersweet.
Yes.
Melt With You, Modern English, as well as a cover tune, Camper Van Beethoven doing Pictures of Matchstick Men, which is just a fun one.
Favorite. Yeah. I love that one.
And one big one for me was from The Call, and the album is called Modern Romans, and The Walls Came Down. That is just, I think, one of my all-time favorites. Whenever I would do radio shows or go back and do radio shows, that was always on my playlist to play if I had an hour or so. That was one of the songs that was tops.
Okay. There was Uskadu had New Day Rising, and they had Terms of Psychic Warfare. that was on the second side. Again, this loud, this droning. There's 60s pop sensibility happening underneath this wall of sound that three guys were making. That was incredible, but they had figured out how to write melody, and that is one that, again, it just gets repeat play. I mean, the whole album, New Day Rising, is an absolute favorite, but in terms of psychic warfare.
You talked about Husker Du, and that's kind of a foray into punk. And you'd also mentioned the Dead Kennedys, but that was an early on. Midway through, for me at least, this advent in punk rock becomes fun punk rock.
Yeah.
The completely irreverent, where something like the Dead Kennedys takes things very, very seriously. Jello Biafra, I don't even begin to know where to start with his political sensibilities coming into play in the music. But then you've got people like the Dead Milkmen coming in, or Fear, or even Mojo Nixon and Skid Roper, where this whole idea of punk showed that it could be fun as well as politically charged.
Yeah, Dead Milk. Dead Milkmen must have took their name to make fun of the Dead Kennedys. Absolutely must have.
I believe they did. I read something to that effect a long time ago. But they're going to take punk and turn it over and just say, listen, we're going to make fun of this whole genre.
And Jim and I we're a big Dead Milkmen fan. I mean,
Indeed.
Bitch and Camaro, we can just go through that any time of day.
And Punk Rock Girl, their biggest hit by far in my book.
Yeah. Yeah, another group I really from that mid-era was The Liars. And they're out of Boston. And they put out, I think it was 84, they put out Fire. And it begins, their very first song is Don't Give It Up Now. And it's just this garage rock organ, fast organ, just blaring in there. And it is garage rock. And that was the neat thing. In the mid-'80s, garage rock made that big comeback. And suddenly you were seeing all these groups just coming in, and it was pure 60s garage rock just storming up through the college and alternative charts.
Well, let's talk obscurities. You know, again, my playlist has got some very, very popular stuff on there, things that people have heard of. They can call up in their minds and recall what that sounds like. But I also have some things that through, again, the college radio side of things, gave me access to stuff like, this is really cool. Why has no one heard of this? And as life goes on, I realize, well, no one's heard of it because I'm a little weird. So, I find things like a group called Pop Will Eat Itself.
Yeah.
And they were an industrial punk pop group that did some stuff sampling clips from the movie The Warriors with a song called Can You Dig It?
Okay.
Over and over again. And they're a little odd. Other somewhat obscure things for me, a group called Eben Ozen, EBN/OZN. No real big hit whatsoever, but they're along the lines of that Men Without Hats, that type of group. They did a song called AEIOU and Sometimes Why. If you're going to make a weird song, why not sing about Sesame Street vowels in this case? And then by far, there's this German minimalist group called Trio. They had a couple of minor hits with the likes of Boom Boom and Da Da Da. You listen to this stuff and it's just very drum machiney and droning vocals. And I think they're cool, but people would listen to that and go, what the heck are you listening to, man?
Yeah, Da Da Da. I had that on CD. A couple more obscure ones that I had, the Sinners. And the Sinners were out of Sweden, and they had a song called Barbed Wire Love. One wonderful, again, a garage rock type song. Sweden really put out, like the Nomads, the Sinners, and a few others. Very big into that garage rock scene going on in Sweden. Out of, I think it was might have been New Zealand, was the Lime Spiders. It might have been Australia. And there was the song My Favorite Room, which I believe, isn't that a Beach Boys song originally?
I think so, yes.
And they take it and make it into a psychedelic garage rock classic. It just, it's from their album The Cave Comes Alive, which looks just, totally psychedelic. And that's where the Lime Spiders were heading. Just such a fun group. And for me, forget the Beach Boy version, the Lime Spiders.
Cover tunes as well. There's another one for me, and I guess this would fall into the garage rock side. Another semi-obscure group called the Nails.
Yeah.
And they had a song called Let It All Hang Out, which was a cover of, I believe it was an Hombres song from the 60s garage rock band.
Okay.
And the updated version had a little bit of synthesizer in it because it was the 80s, but was still kind of faithful to that original sound of letting it all hang out.
Mm-hmm.
Saw a man walking upside down type of thing. So it's fun on that respect. Things get a little rocky for me as well. And I don't mean like tough, I mean rock and rolly with a few other ones. I'm always a go-to on my iPhone playlists as well as now on my Spotify one. A group called the Godfathers.
Yes.
That had some very heavy, I want to say like a Social Distortion sound to them, the band Social Distortion. Birth, School, Work, Death was another staple on my radio shows, as well as this another one called The Pursuit of Happiness was the name of this other group.
Yeah.
And I always get chided by Kim for playing a song called I'm an Adult Now,
Yes.
which I've never seen 50 plus years. I'm still working on that.
I had them both albums. Fantastic. I began, I guess, I kept changing, I think, with what I was listening to. And I kind of think as the 90s were coming toward the close, we look at the later, Jane's Addiction came out with Nothing Shocking, and they had the song Ocean Size, which was their Led Zeppelin. It was so big, so much energy and power. Public Enemy in 1988 came out with It Takes a Million to Hold Us Back and Fight the Power. It's still one of my all-time favorite albums, but that song it gets me excited. It is punk rock of rap where you just want to jump up and down and it just go really good. Lou Reed in '88 put out to me his very best album, New York.
Yep.
It just starts with Romeo and Juliet, which is to me a wonderful single. But the rest of that album, totally fantastic.
I've got a copy of that too. Straw Man off of New York by Lou Reed is one of my top ones as well.
Yes. The Water Boys in 1988. And I talked about that album, but again, the lead track, Fisherman's Blues. Just, I can listen to it again and again, never get tired. And then XTC in '89 put out Oranges and Lemons and The Mayor of Simpleton. I mean, the whole album, it's their Sgt. Pepper album.
It is. Yep.
And so there's joy. No one's dying in this album. There's no mass killing going on in this whole album. It's a joyful album, at least I think it is. And just great music.
I had one more from the later 80s that kind of popped up, and I was aware of it then, but kind of rediscovered it maybe about 10 or 15 years ago. And it made sense that I liked it because it was a late 80s album. It's by a group called The Wedding Present. And their album was Bizarro, but a song called Brass Neck, that often gets repeated on my playlist. I'll play that a couple times. It's just a very droney 80s alternative, but with that British feel to it.
Okay. No, there's so much. When I was looking, the playlist that I'll share has a lot of other songs that were on here. And, there's songs like, Kim Carnes' Betty Davis Eyes, something I love. Howard Jones, he put out, was it Things Only Get Better, which, again, it's part of the more of that pop side, but I really enjoyed. And to this day, I still, there's good memories behind those songs.
There is. And, well, for me, at least, there's some other interesting memories. One of the things I think I've shared with you before is that by the mid 80s, I had been working radio a lot. I worked college radio, but at the same time, while I was going to school and working at the college radio station, I began to get either commercial jobs. So at one point in my time from like 86 through 89, I'd not only worked the alternative college radio, but I worked top 40 radio. I did an all news station, a country station, and a public radio station. So I was on air with everything from classical music and jazz to the news talk type stuff and rock and roll. But the pop top 40 stuff has to this day been tough for me to listen to because I worked overnights for half a year at a radio station when radio stations did live stuff with people overnight. Here I am, a 20s college student. And to this day, I have like a physical reaction when I hear something like Peter Cetera, Glory of Love, or Wang Chung, Everybody Have Fun Tonight, because those were just pounded into me several times a night between midnight and 6 a.m. with a lack of sleep and Jolt Cola.
Well, I like the Wang Chung one, but the Peter Cetera, forget that one. No, I can't do that. No, and yeah, there were some bad ballads back then. But
there were, but it shaped a decade.
Yeah.
And like we said when we started off, this is a decade that had everything from these powerful pop ballads that people loved, and it turned into top 40 instantly recognizable hits, both the good and the bad, whether you like them or not. Built this city.
yeah,
To some very, very cool stuff from the likes of REM and The Cure. I am going to go on record right here, right now, saying, and you guys can take me to task on this in the comment sections, that the 80s, the 1980s, 1980 through 1989, are the best decade for music in the history of music.
I'll
say
agree.
it.
I'll agree. I will agree. If when I look at my collection, it is heavily weighted into there. And maybe it's our age. We were coming of age.
Yep.
That was a big time. That music means a lot. The other decades all have great stuff, but the 80s was so eclectic. And you took the 60s. You know, you think about it, every 20 years, it seems, we repeat. And it's just the way generations go, because the kids are looking, man, 20 years ago, did you hear this? And let's do that. And you can really go back and you can map that out. But no, I would totally agree with that. And we never even talked about hair metal bands of the 80s, which I'm not a fan of. I'm sorry, but many are. And that was a huge for them, though.
Well, and again, we started off with me saying a lot of this hard rock heavy metal. And in the early 80s, the concerts I had under my belt included Judas Priest and Def Leppard. Saw them when the drummer had both arms. And a lot of Rush in through there. And who else did I see? And it's just, AC/DC. I saw them. My ears rang for 3 days. But then I kind of melded through that. I still enjoy listening to those. I'll throw on AC/DC and Rush and Ozzy from time to time here in the store. But my go-tos on the phone when I'm just me listening are a lot of this 80s stuff.
No Motley Crue, no Great White.
They're in the collection.
Winger, yeah. But it, for many people, that was huge. It was a big part of that decade,
So let us know what you think. I mean, are we off base on this? Steve and I are a little older, and a few years separate us. You were in college, and I was in high school at the start, and you were working, and I was in college at the end of that decade. But I still stand true to that. This is just one of the best there is.
I will, when I pull albums to listen, there's a good chance it's going to be something from that decade, yes.
So we are trying something new. We forgot to mention early on that the podcast is now on Spotify. So we are going to try utilizing Spotify for a little bit more of what it's meant to do and have a shareable playlist. And so a lot of the songs that we talked about, both Steve and I have created separate playlists. We will share them in the description of the podcast and into the comment section below, and just kind of curious what you folks think of that.
Yes, please take a listen. They're great. Are we on iHeart too now?
We're on iHeartRadio as well. Yes, I forgot to mention that, and a few other places.
The big time. Here we are.
We're getting there. I still have to figure out how to get in and look at the stats for each of those, but that'll happen. We'll get to that. But welcome all of you who are listening on the likes of iHeart or Amazon or Spotify. Thank you very much for finding us, and we hope you enjoy two guys talking about records.
That's right, because this is our 10th one. You got 9 others you can listen to.
You can go back in time. We have a lot of other great subjects we're going to get to, but I think that this will probably wrap up the week, Steve.
All right, fantastic. What a great topic. Love it.
It is a fun one. Go 80s. Yes. I'm going to channel
except forget the haircuts. The haircuts, the clothes, so much of that, but the music.
Still working the skinny tie, and I had a tail.
I did have a great skinny tie. Oh, my God. And pointy shoes.
Okay, fashion, not so much. Music.
Yes.
Off the roof. You folks have a great week, and we'll talk to you next time from two guys talking about records, a Vinyl Community podcast. My name's Jim.
And I'm Steve.
You guys have a good one.